Hey, you. Thanks for tuning in. Just a quick heads up, this episode is rated R, so expect that there will be some language that you may not want your kids to hear, lots of adult topics, and quite possibly some explicit conversations about sex. This episode is probably not safe for work, though, I guess it depends on where you work. Welcome to Pleasure Central Radio, the place to rethink the assumptions we don't even realize we are making that keep us from getting what we truly want out of work, life, and love. Here is your sneak peek into an authentic, pleasure-focused conversation. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hey.
So first, I think I better introduce you. In the studio today, I have Rowan and Athalie.
Hey. You said it right.
And I've been dating Rowan for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Like that.
Yep, that sounds right.
And Rowan and Athalie have been married for how long?
9.5 years.
Something
we'll go
like
with that.
So we brought you here in this studio to hear a little bit more about your history, your background, where you came from, how you ended up where you are now. And why don't I just turn it over and you can introduce yourselves a little bit.
Do you want to go first? Do you want to talk about where we are now?
I always go first. What are you talking about? Yes. Okay. So I grew up in a very conservative religious family. I think sort of like Amish. Head coverings, and I was homeschooled and raised to be a good housewife. Spoiler alert, I'm failing at that. And I love to work a job. Anyway, that's off topic. And I met Rowan at a church that was somewhat less conservative than what I grew up, kind of churches I grew up in. He, and you can go into this, but was coming from a non-religious background and ended up in this church, so we were kind of coming from opposite directions, and we ended up being really good friends. And then I told him that I wanted to marry him, and then
You told me that you wanted me to propose to you.
well, yes, of course, I'm supposed to propose. I have regrets about this now. And yeah, there was some back and forth period of a couple of weeks before we settled on the fact that we were indeed going to get married to
Contract negotiation, all that.
our best friends. And yeah, that's kind of my background up until the quick version.
I think mine is probably quicker because you hit most of it there. But so non-religious background for me, originally Australia, moved to the US in 2008 and didn't know anybody here when I moved here, was single, didn't really make any friends, and then met some people that went to a church here, the same one that we met at. They seemed really friendly and really eager to be my friend. I now know that's because they wanted to add another person to their ranks. But I still appreciate the friendship I had with them. It's not like it wasn't genuine. I just understand a little bit more about why they were so eager for the friendship now. So I found some community in church at a time when I was extremely lonely, and then also some structure. I had very permissive parents that let me try a lot of things and do a lot of things, which was really great. But then I also found that it was nice to have someone kind of lay down some rules and tell me what to do and what not to do. And so at that point, I'd always had very black and white thinking, so that resonated with me and I enjoyed it for a while. And so then Athalie and I got married, and I guess that kind of brings us, we wanted to go over what our relationship looks like now, right? Obviously, we started out as we did not kiss or hold hands, or even, we didn't even really touch skin. We were did the full-on evangelical Christian thing when we were engaged.
# purity culture.
Yeah. And we did it too. We weren't just doing it around other people and then making out in our cars in secret or whatever. We were 100% bought into it.
We wrote a contract and signed it and placed it in the front of our Bibles. This is how dedicated we were.
Yep.
We stopped just short of signing it in blood, but basically there.
Yeah. Probably would have been lamb's blood.
Yeah, because human blood, that's a different religion.
Yep. Yeah, so we went from that, and then we kind of spoiled at the front. We're obviously not still in that paradigm because Rebecca and I are dating, and we're all hanging out, just made sushi together, so something happened in the middle.
Something definitely.
A lot of things happened. Yeah. So I think one of the things that Rebecca and I were talking about, and as I was telling her, I was like, this will make a great episode for your podcast, was the kind of journey that both of us came on as I recovered from this double whammy combination of childhood sexual abuse and lots of body shaming, sexuality shaming, with religion. And so, not surprisingly, we got married. We were supposed to have like epic wedding night sex. And I don't think it was bad sex.
I feel like for the first, probably the honeymoon, which for us was a longer one. We went to Australia after we got married. So I'd say probably the first like 3 or 4 weeks, sex was working for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a very abrupt change, though, from like, I've never even held your hand to I'm having sex for the first time. Well, that was my experience.
We tried most of the things.
I would say we tried most of the holes. There's other things. There was things we didn't try for sure. Not specific to holes. There's only so many holes.
Yep.
There's a limit to the number of holes. That's probably
It's not a game of golf.
Yeah, so like there was a lot of kind of exploration and relative freedom, I think, compared to the like we don't touch each other or express our affection physically at all. However, well, also further compounding it is I got pregnant almost right away after our honeymoon, and I was very sick when I was pregnant, so that kind of, I was vomiting a lot, I had really bad morning sickness, so that kind of put the kibosh on sex for a while, because if you've ever been like super nauseous, just sex doesn't really come to mind as like a thing you want to do. At least that was not my experience. So
does not sound like very good.
Nausea's like this all-consuming feeling where like it's like the only thing you can think about when you're nauseous. It's like, and it was like having a really bad stomach flu nonstop for like 6 months. It was pretty gnarly. There's a reason I've only been pregnant once and have no interest in repeating this experience.
I feel like I came up with this analogy that I was pretty proud of while we were eating sushi for the experience of going from nothing to everything. So I think we definitely follow the rules in Christianity that like don't touch, don't kiss, all that stuff. And then paired with that, there's an expectation that all changes the second you're married. You are suddenly intimately bonded in this way that is inseparable. And you also have amazing sex on your wedding night and forevermore. And so I think...
But only with your spouse.
Yes, sorry, yes.
That's important.
Yeah. And I think that like honeymoon period for us, where everything seemed to be working, the analogy I had was that's kind of like dumping a bunch of gasoline on a fire and putting a match on it. And you're like, wow, this fire's going, there's a whole bunch of heat here. But as soon as the gasoline runs out, you've like singed the exterior of some of the logs, but there's no coals, there's no fire that you've been building as you've gone through, like snuggling and holding hands and making out and like anticipating sex and working up to it. When you just jump in and go, the fire, we didn't take the time to build the coals of the fire. So
yeah, and then I think maybe, I don't know how many months in, but I think it started with while I was still pregnant, I think.
Yep.
So when I started to not be nauseous, I started realizing when we had sex that I was pretty much doing the stereotypical thing that you hear people who have survived sexual assault do, where they like are kind of like disembodied while sex is happening, and they're like, I wasn't there, and I was very disturbed by that because I didn't really know what was going on. I didn't understand why this was happening. I didn't have explicit memories of being sexually abused at that point. But after, there was a number of kind of little clues that came up, and Rowan eventually was like, are you sure you weren't, like, raped at some point? Because the stuff you're telling me that you're experiencing is, like, what people say what sex is like after a sexual assault. And I was like, well, no, I don't, like, that didn't happen to me because I didn't remember it. We even, like, went to a pastor to, like, see if I needed, oh my God, I forgot about this, to see if I needed, like, an exorcism type thing so that I could enjoy sex with my husband. And weirdly, this pastor actually was like, no, I think there's, like, something physically going on with your body. You should go see a doctor, which I give him credit for that because he was known for opting for the exorcism route of dealing with demonic oppression, etc. Yeah, but it just didn't really get better.
Until something happened, right? What happened?
Well, did you have anything else you wanted to say about that period from your experience?
No, I don't think so. Carry on.
So we started doing foster care because, of course, we can't. You get married, you have a baby right away, and then you, when your baby's 18 months old, you start doing foster care. And that's a pretty good picture of how we've approached our relationship. We're always just like, what's the next thing we're going to do? And a kid that lived with us reported sexual abuse from her stepdad. And so I went through the process of, like, reporting that, as all foster parents have to report any, like, allegations of abuse to CPS, and then there was interviews with a detective and, like, meeting with a sexual assault advocate, and which I had actually done that work as a volunteer when I was, like, 19 years old. I volunteered at a rape crisis center on their hotline, and I attended the emergency room for rape exams with people, and, like, it wasn't like new to me, but somehow it was different when it was like this kid now that I'm responsible for helping navigate this. And as we started talking, we got her into counseling, and so we're seeing this trauma counselor, and then there was kind of like a parental counseling part. And as I was talking to her, she was like, I think maybe, like, there's something going on here that's, like, connecting with you differently. And I was like, well, probably I'll start counseling. And then as I started talking about stuff, my own experiences started coming up, and pieces were connecting with that. And then it was her suggestion that because one of the things with our sex life at that point had been Rowan was always the one who was initiating. Like, he was always the one that wanted to have sex. I had, like, zero sex drive. And I felt this responsibility to, like, meet the sexual needs of my partner like a good Christian wife does.
Did anybody tell you how your sex drive changes after having kids?
Yes, so at that point, after that pastor made the comment about going to see a doctor, I did go to see a doctor and found out I had, like, a whole bunch of hormonal imbalances. So I still see that doctor, who's a naturopath to this day. Like, she has healed me, and in many ways. There was definitely a physical component.
You mean God working through her has healed you?
Bull fucking shit. She doesn't believe in God, so how could God work through her?
I guess we can't make every line we say sarcasm, can we?
Can't we, though? Yeah.
That was a joke, by the way. Harken back to religious days.
Yeah. So I was, like, dealing with kind of like a medical component. That was kind of the first place that I started dealing with it. And then, we figured out that I had, like, zero testosterone in my body, which you need to have a sex drive. And that was probably related to, like, giving birth, and then there's a whole complicated hormone situation that was happening, which I don't believe is unrelated to, like, the childhood trauma thing. Mm-hmm. But I think they interlock. But that's a whole separate conversation about childhood trauma and endocrine health problems.
So you're seeing counselor.
Yeah, so I started seeing counselor, and she kind of basically listened to me and reflected what I was saying to her until I got to the point where I was like, could admit to myself what had happened. And then it was kind of like, well, what do I do now? And her suggestion, having, like, worked with, like, she's a trauma counselor, so that's her specialty, was that we switch it up so we only had sex if I initiated, so I wouldn't feel any of this pressure to meet somebody else's needs, and I would kind of have full agency over when I was going to have sex, basically, and when it was going to be initiated, and that, if you know stuff about trauma, like a huge part of what makes a bad experience traumatic is that you lose that sense of agency over what's happening and you feel helpless in a situation. So I do think that that suggestion was kind of based on like helping me regain some agency over my sexuality. And so we didn't have sex for like 6 months.
I think it's also worth mentioning here so we've been married for maybe like 4 years at this point.
Yeah.
And this is about the first time that we both kind of realize what's happening. Like, we can tell this story in retrospect and say this led to this, led to this, led to this, but this period about 4 years in where you're seeing a counselor and she has some suggestions about like, well, maybe this happened to you and maybe this is something you could try. This is like the first series of conversations we have where we're like, we can put words around like, these are the experiences we're having when we connect intimately, have sex or anything along those lines. And you're able to say what your experience is like, and I'm mostly horrified to hear what your experience has been like. It's not...
Yeah.
I mean, I knew we were having issues, but I didn't realize how bad it was for you. Yeah.
I don't think I did either, because I was very stuck in this place of like, this is a role I have to play regardless of whether I want to do it or not. Men have needs, obviously. Women are here to satisfy them. Which was not a belief that you held. I try to always make sure I say that when I tell the story. Like, that was my whole own internal story that I had told, and you were like horrified when I said it out loud. And you were like, the fuck are you? Like, what?
You know, it's interesting because it brings up something that I have thought about for a long time. I don't remember who said this to me or when, but it was years ago, and the idea was you can't truly say yes unless you can say no without consequence.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this is a situation where that really applies. You can't really say yes to sex, have enthusiastic consent, if you feel like saying no will have some kind of negative repercussions for you, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds like you were caught in that trap.
Yeah, when I think the negative repercussions that I was imagining weren't from Rowan, they were from God. So that's a fun layer to throw on top of there.
Because God wants you to have sex when you don't want to, and he doesn't want you to have orgasms without babies.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the church we were in was this interesting mix. I won't go into this too much, it's very much a sidetrack, but it came across as being a lot more progressive. We talk very openly about sex, but once you peel back all the layers, it was still the same core set of beliefs. They were just dressed up in fancy language and felt a little more palatable.
Or maybe they were like willing to even just like the fact that they were willing to talk about sex at all.
Yeah.
Made them seem very progressive compared to like a lot of the churches who that's not even like it's not even what we use. That's like a swear word to say sex.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to be careful too, because when I say the church, that can sound like there was this other group of people pressuring us to do this way, and I do think there is an element of like spiritual authority and power and all of that stuff too, but we were like actively part of the church and obviously actively perpetuating that in our own lives as well.
Yeah.
So it's not, I think that some of it is external, but a lot of it was stuff we were doing and participating in as well.
Yeah.
Should we open the door for a minute?
Yes.
Whew.
That got steamy.
Yes,
whole
right?
way out.
Good idea. I used to record in here every week with Sean. Sean is 6'2".
That's why the shelf's up there.
Yeah, that's why the shelf's up. Me and Sean in here, sometimes with a guest. Sometimes the guest has to stand on yoga blocks because we forget. When I built it, I was like, everyone's tall, right?
Everyone is 6 feet tall.
Yeah. So it can get nice and warm in here.
We only have about 10 minutes. What are the bits we want to...
I'm like imagining talking about kind of how the like taking back the agency thing was actually super healing for me, and then what that was like on your end to kind of like have that.
Yeah.
And now.
And then come back to Polly.
Yeah, come back to Polly and
Yep.
That seemed.
Yeah. I just wanted to make sure I had a picture in my head of... Does that that aligns with
Yeah.
something you would be interested in.
Yeah, I think that fits well.
You ready?
At your leisure.
I feel like you haven't said many words. Do you want to say some words to...
I don't know. I feel like I'm asking the questions and you guys are telling the
Okay.
stories, which is a good place for me
Okay,
here.
cool.
Okay.
Yeah, stories are really helpful, especially when they're personal.
Cool.
So you two have mentioned now that at this point in your relationship, things are a little bit strained, they're a little bit weird, you've found a way to get some agency back into your sex life. What happened next?
Well, like I kind of left that fun cliffhanger. We didn't have sex for 6 months, and that was probably the most healing part of my sex journey. And I felt no guilt about that. We decided that we were gonna, for one thing, we were gonna like snuggle, but that did not mean sex, which was something I had like connected those, and so I was avoiding even like all kinds of physical intimacy because I was like, this leads to having sex, and I don't want to have sex. We came up with this name for it called NISs, which is non-intercourse snuggles. And he would like clarify, like every time be like, these are NISs, like there's no pressure, like this isn't leading to sex. Even if I get horny, we're not having sex unless you want to have sex. And that was hugely healing. And then I think it was like gradually I started instigating it more, but it probably took like at least a solid year altogether, but the first half of which we probably hardly ever had sex. And then started having like monthly sex and then slightly more often and gradually improved from there.
I think an interesting point here is, I think from your perspective, you felt like this was a thing that was like healing for you, but was this huge sacrifice for me, maybe at least to start with. But I think for me at this point, like I didn't want to have sex with someone that didn't want to have sex with me, and there was so much more to our relationship than just sex. Like our relationship started off being friends that did a whole bunch of stuff together, and that's always been a huge part of our relationship. And so for me, going from like not really understanding why this wasn't working, why we weren't like having mutually enjoyable physical connection, to then like you starting counseling and having some words to put around it, and you being able to say, this is the experience I'm having, and me being able to correct your perception of the experience I was having. Like I'm not here like, well, the Bible says you're supposed to fuck me, so too bad. Like that was 100% not the mindset I was in. That felt empowering to me to be like, well, this isn't just some like nebulous thing that none of us understand. So I feel like we were able to take back some power. That information is power, right? That's what they say, or knowledge.
Yeah.
And
naming something really helps you know how to address it.
Yeah.
I guess we also had a concrete action plan for like where to go from here too, which was probably very appealing to you. It's how kind of how your brain works.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, so we do this thing now where you initiate sex when you want it, and that's kind of like will prevent this thing from carrying forward in the way that it had been.
And then actually even the like not really having sex or potentially having very little sex for an indefinite period of time was actually also relieving to me as well, because I was not enjoying the experience we're having either. And so to be like, well, let's just stop for a bit and take a breather and work out what's happening, actually felt really good to me as well. To be like, pressure's off, like we can hug, I'm free, like if we're snuggling and I get aroused, that's okay. I don't have to like try and hide it or work out the right way to manage it. I can just be aroused and that's fine. Like that's an okay response to have, and we don't have to do anything about it.
Being aroused is the best.
Yeah.
I think I don't know about fun. An interesting kind of like anecdote of the place where we were at is that at one point prior to me starting counseling, I think I told you that there was like a way that you had looked at me that I described as hungry eyes.
Mm-hmm.
That reminded me of my abuser. And so I think as like, to me, that was kind of like a triggering thing. And your response to that was like, okay, well, I kind of need to like clamp down on this like visible, you make me horny kind of response or like, I really want to have sex with you, because that was like an uncomfortable thing for me. And I feel like it's actually only been recently that you've been able to reconnect.
Yeah,
that
definitely.
thing.
Yeah, I think I like...
So I know there was a lot of positive parts, but I do think there's parts that you had to kind of like disconnect for a little while to make it.
Yeah, I feel like the feeling like I needed to suppress physical attraction to you, that mostly came before we reached this period.
Yeah.
Where
yeah.
I was like doing that and it was clearly not something you were enjoying. We didn't have the words to have an intelligent conversation about it, or like an informed conversation about it. And so you kind of just learn, old school lizard brain. You learn, I do this, it doesn't get the result I want, so I'll just shut that down and stop doing that. Then being able to talk about it, I feel like I kind of became neutral at that point. But I had already trained my brain to like shut down showing or entertaining physical attraction to you. And so it's taken a period of time for that brain circuitry to come back online, repower it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Make the hungry eyes again.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that has gotten much better since you started dating other people in addition to me. It's almost like you got to go have hungry eyes with someone else that had none of this baggage.
Mm-hmm.
And then that like kind of like unlocked some door to where you can now have hungry eyes with me. Also, it doesn't trigger me anymore, so that's very nice.
Very helpful.
Yeah.
Very helpful.
So I think there's a step in there that we should talk about, which is becoming polyamorous. So obviously we were monogamous, very Christian mindset. I think the one thing that I think stood us a little bit outside maybe some of the Christian sphere is that we were always very open about the fact that we were attracted to other people, and we were always very free to talk to each other about that. Which I think that's one thing I always appreciated from our relationship. If I,
Like
there was someone that was
find
around
this
us that I
actress
was attracted to, we
Yeah.
could talk about that. Or even a person that's maybe closer, like someone we know personally. We could just talk about the fact that we were attracted to them without that being weird.
I think we did that at the time as a way of like, if this isn't a secret, it won't become like this thing between us, so we'll just like say it out loud.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't an intent towards like actually doing something with that, but I
Yeah.
felt like we were always able to be very honest with each other about that. The bit I want to be a little bit careful with in the story, it's not like we had all of these problems and then we became polyamorous and it fixed everything. We went through a lot of the healing ourselves, and then when we got to a good place where I think it worked through some of the difficult stuff, the friendship aspect of our relationship was back to being as strong as it ever had been. Sex was getting better and better all the time. We were like having... I feel like we would regularly have like, oh, that's the best sex we've had so far.
Yeah.
That would be like a regular experience.
Ooh.
Yeah.
It still happens to this day.
Yeah.
Just keeps getting better.
Yeah.
And may it continue forever.
Let it be so. And so once we reached that point, we had kind of floated the idea of polyamory or some kind of open relationship a couple of times, but I feel like we actually had a serious conversation when we were in a really good spot.
Yeah.
About, I think that expanding, so we went from like very Christian mindset where we are everything to each other, and then we started to like really lean into the separate bits of ourselves. Like we could have hobbies that didn't overlap, so we could go on trips.
Yeah.
You could go dancing. We could really lean into who we were individually, and then we could start to have really close friendships with people of the opposite sex that would have been frowned upon in the Christian world. And then it just kept expanding from there to the point that we're like, well, what if we had romantic relationships with other people? What if we had sexual relationships with other people? And that led us to deciding to try opening our relationship, which we didn't really know what that meant at the time, but pretty quickly landed on polyamory, where we have like meaningful, loving connections with other people.
Yeah.
Or casual sex or whatever is good, but you know, it's not, for us, it's not just...
We just have sex with other people.
Yeah.
We actually want to have like deep connections, romantic connections with multiple people.
Yep.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
I just had a thought, and now it's gone.
It is 9:35 too, so we should wrap up.
I know. I thought I had a good finishing thought.
So now you guys are polyamorous in your relationship status.
Mm-hmm.
You're still married.
Mm-hmm.
Your kids know a lot about your relationship status, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting topic because I think when people find out, so I think the assumption if you're not polyamorous is that when people go polyamorous, it's just about sex. It's about fucking other people. And so when people find out that our kids know, they're like, you're talking to your kids about like what you do in your sex lives. And it's like, no, obviously we don't. I mean,
they have asked some questions and we give them factual,
age-appropriate
answers, but it's not like we're... I think neither one of us have like introduced them to somebody who was just like, the first time I met you, casual partner, like I have no idea where this is going kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But they know that we go on dates with other people.
Yeah, that's how we described it to start with. We had watched a TV show, Atypical, where the wife had cheated on the husband. And so we actually used that as an example and said the reason that was bad in the TV show is because the wife and the husband had agreed to only date each other. And that's the agreement we'd had so far, but we had decided...
lying to each other.
Yeah, so we had decided to change our agreement that it's now okay if we do date other people. And so that's how we explained it to our kids. And then over time, as we've like built relationships with people, we've had some partners that have met the kids, people that we've been in longer, more connected relationships with. Like yourself, Rebecca.
Yeah. You've met the kids.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So
kids.
Yeah, and they weren't like shocked by it because they didn't have any, I guess. This is always the case with like, you just assume whatever your parents are doing is normal. I didn't want to get married for a very long time because I was like, well, I don't want what they had. And I just was kind of had this assumption that was the only kind of relationship that was an option. So basically, until I decided I wanted to marry Rowan, was like, I'm just going to be a solo person who just does her own thing because I don't want to be tied to this type of thing. So they were just kind of like, oh, okay, cool. That's like what you do. Great.
Yep.
We have a preteen now who's very like, ew, but it's equally ew about us kissing in front of her as knowing that we date other people. There's not really a difference there. So
Yep.
That's very cool. And so do you think that this transformation, this journey that your relationship has been through has been a healthy one or has led to a healthy relationship?
I think the biggest thing that is a strength of our relationship, and it was probably there all along and it's just kind of expanded as we've leaned on it, is the giving each other space to grow without demanding things. Even taking the polyamory piece out of it, a lot of the people that we knew that ended up going down this journey of kind of deconstructing their faith and religion, like their relationships did not survive that because it was so based on that in the beginning. And if you're not both kind of progressing through this journey in the same direction at the same pace, it's very hard to like keep a relationship that was started on this religious basis to start with. But I feel like all through a relationship, and I would definitely credit you with kind of modeling this for me. I did not always do it as well as you. I wish you could see his face smiling right now. He's like, no shit.
I was just feeling awkward actually, but go ahead.
Let each other kind of grow and explore things at our own pace and end up wherever we individually end up. And I think that space has allowed us to continue to be great partners for each other, even as like lots of other stuff has changed in our personal lives and our relationship and all that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think the key takeaway for me isn't that like polyamory is, I mean, to me it's an amazing thing, but it's not this is the right way to do relationships. I think the key aspect for us is that we have felt more and more freedom in all aspects of our lives to organize our lives the way that works best for us. And I think even looking at other relationships, there's a time I would have been really judgmental for people who changed a lot and then separated because of that. And I think there should be freedom in that too. Like if you have a massive spiritual change and your partner goes in a different direction, people should feel the freedom to do what's right for each of them. And that could mean separating or, and for us, polyamory has been a great fit. And so I think that is clearly the right path for us to go down. But I'm really grateful that we've got to explore and find the things that work for us. Yeah. I mean, we didn't throw this as a juicy little bit to put into, but I think one of the other big healing points was when we first started using sex toys as well. I feel like that brought some spice into the relationship that just kind of broke through some of the challenges.
Mm.
Yeah.
And that was 100% you were encouraging me. I had this weird idea that if I started using a sex toy, I would just real sex, I'm using air quotes here, would never be satisfying again. So I was afraid to even try it because I'm already struggling. What if I create this whole crutch for myself that I'm not non-functional without? And then because you had suggested it multiple times, you're I feel like this is something that's often very useful for women. Are you sure you don't want to try a vibrator? And then we went sex toy shopping and we bought one, and then I started having orgasms, and I was oh, okay. Hello. Yeah. That is very solid.
Well, it does feel like you guys have gone through some amazing things together, and you look so happy and so connected.
The rosy cheeks are because of how very warm it is in here.
I thought that was your adoration for me.
It's very sweet.
We can kiss for the... I almost said kiss for the camera. There is no camera, but yes.
Kiss for the audio camera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Thank you for having us in your little studio and for being part of our lives. It's pretty awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I appreciate both of those things as well.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Thank you guys for coming on the show. I look forward to having you back someday.
Sounds great. Thank you.
I feel like we have more topics we could talk about.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure we do. We just barely covered sex toys, so come on.
Yeah. Talking to your kids about your sex life, answering questions about sex, that's one of my favorite topics, so.
Yeah.
Potential future.
Yeah.
I love that your son was do you use condoms with your other partners?
Yes. That's a fun conversation. He also asked me so many questions about how tampons worked.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. This is from The Power of Now, the chapter on enlightened relationships, page 162. If your enlightenment is egoic self-delusion, then life will soon give you a challenge that will bring you out of unconsciousness in whatever form, as fear, anger, defensiveness, judgment, depression, and so on. If you are in a relationship, many of your challenges will come through your partner. For example, a woman may be challenged by an unresponsive male partner who lives almost entirely in his head. She will be challenged by his inability to hear her, to give her attention and space to be, which is due to his lack of presence. The absence of love in the relationship, which is usually more keenly felt by a woman than a man, will trigger the woman's pain body, and through it she will attack her partner, blame, criticize, make wrong, and so on. This, in turn, now becomes his challenge. To defend himself against her pain body's attack, which he sees as totally unwarranted, he will become even more deeply entrenched in his mental positions as he justifies, defends himself, or counterattacks. Eventually, this may activate his own pain body. When both partners have thus been taken over, a level of deep unconsciousness has been reached, of emotional violence, savage attack, and counterattack. It will not subside until both pain bodies have replenished themselves and then enter the dormant stage. Until the next time. This is only one of an endless number of possible scenarios. Many volumes have been written, and many more could be written, about the ways in which unconsciousness is brought out in male-female relationships. But as I said earlier, once you understand the root of the dysfunction, you do not need to explore its countless manifestations. Every challenge that it contains is actually a disguised opportunity for salvation. At every stage of the unfolding dysfunctional process, freedom from unconsciousness is possible. For example, the woman's hostility could become a signal for the man to come out of his mind-identified state, awaken into the now, become present, instead of becoming even more identified with his mind, even more unconscious. Instead of being the pain body, the woman could be the knowing that watches the emotional pain in herself, thus accessing the power of the now and initiating the transmutation of the pain. This would remove the compulsive and automatic outward projection of it. She could then express her feelings to her partner. There is no guarantee, of course, that he will listen, but it gives him a good chance to become present, and certainly breaks the insane cycle of the involuntary acting out of old mind patterns. If the woman misses that opportunity, the man could watch his own mental emotional reaction to her pain, his own defensiveness rather than being the reaction. He could then watch his own pain body being triggered and thus bring consciousness into his emotions. In this way, a clear and still space of pure awareness would come into being, the knowing, the silent witness, the watcher. This awareness does not deny the pain and yet is beyond it. It allows the pain to be and yet transmutes it at the same time. It accepts everything and transforms everything. A door would have opened up for her through which she could easily have joined him in that space. If you are consistently, or at least predominantly present in your relationship, this will be the greatest challenge for your partner. They will not be able to tolerate your presence for very long and stay unconscious. If they are ready, they will walk through the door that you opened for them and join in that state. If they are not, you will separate like oil and water. The light is too painful for someone who wants to remain in darkness. Hey, pleasure seeker. Well, that's it for today's conversation. Here at Pleasure Central Radio, we love using conscious communication, science geekery, and copious amounts of true pleasure to improve our partnerships, our money, and our love lives. And we hope you do too. If you loved what you heard here, we'd love a review. You can listen to other episodes of the podcast and read thought-provoking essays or poems written by me, Radiant Rebecca, by checking out the blog on pleasurecentralpodcast.com. Sign up to hear about new episodes immediately at pleasurecentralpodcast.com. Your thought to ponder today is: this is a great snippet from Bird by Bird by Lamott, the chapter on perfectionism. If you don't believe in God, it may help to remember this great line of Janine Roth's, that awareness is learning to keep yourself company, and then learn to be more compassionate company, as if you were somebody you are fond of and wish to encourage. I doubt that you would read a close friend's early efforts and, in his or her presence, roll your eyes and snicker. I doubt that you would pantomime sticking your finger down your throat. I think you might say something along the lines of, "Good for you. We can work out some of the problems later, but for now, full steam ahead." In any case, the bottom line is that if you want to write, you get to. But you probably won't be able to get very far if you don't start trying to get over your perfectionism. You set out to tell a story of some sort, to tell the truth as you feel it, because something is calling you to do so. It calls you like the beckoning finger of smoke in cartoons that rises off of the pie cooling on the windowsill, slides under the doors, and into the mouse holes or into the nostrils of the sleeping man or woman in the easy chair. Then the aromatic smoke crooks its finger, and the mouse or the man or woman rises and follows, nose in the air. But some days, the smoke is faint, and you just have to follow it as best you can, sniffing away. Still, even on those days, You might notice how great perseverance feels, and the next day the scent may seem stronger. Or it may just be that you are developing a quiet doggedness. That is priceless. Perfectionism, on the other hand, will only drive you mad.